Thomas C. Wales had spent most of his life serving the law and advocating for justice. At 49, he was a seasoned federal prosecutor in Seattle, Washington, known for his tireless work in criminal law and his unwavering commitment to gun control. A man of conviction, Thomas understood the power of both words and action, fighting for a safer society where firearms did not claim lives needlessly. He was a voice for victims and a quiet, steadfast force in the battle against the rise of gun violence in America. His home, a modest brick house nestled in the quiet residential streets of Seattle, was also his sanctuary. His basement was a haven for reflection and work, a place where he could immerse himself in case files and legal briefs while still staying connected to his family. He often joked that it was the only room in the house where he could escape the distractions of daily life, but to those who knew him best, it was clear that the basement office was where Thomas felt most alive, poring over evidence, writing letters, and speaking out against the growing threat of gun violence in his community. On the evening of October 11, 2001, that office became the site of an unimaginable tragedy. It was a peaceful night, the kind Seattle's autumn evenings often promised, crisp air and the smell of damp leaves wafting through the open window. Thomas sat at his desk, reviewing a case that had been particularly close to his heart. He was preparing for another round of talks on stricter gun control measures, his latest effort to push lawmakers and the public to confront the escalating issue of firearms in American society. He believed in the power of his work, and his conviction was apparent to all who knew him. But that night, as the clock ticked past midnight, a single shot rang out. It was almost imperceptible at first, a faint crack in the air, too soft for an instant to grasp. By the time Thomas heard it, the bullet had already struck, fired through the window of his basement office, ripping through the still night. It struck him in the chest. He collapsed onto his desk, lifeless, the papers scattered before him like the final, unfinished work of a man cut short in his prime. The investigation that followed was intense, but frustratingly inconclusive. No suspect emerged, no motive could be definitively tied to his death. Was it a random act of violence, or was it an attack tied to his work? Could it have been someone with ties to the world of criminal activity he'd worked tirelessly to fight? Or worse, was it an act of vengeance by someone angered by his outspoken stance on gun control? Despite the best efforts of law enforcement, the investigation continued to unravel in dead ends. The bullet had been fired from a distance, perhaps from an alley or a neighboring street. Witnesses had heard nothing out of the ordinary, and security footage provided no leads. The only thing certain was that Thomas had been targeted. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the tragedy of Thomas Wales's death rippled through his community. His colleagues at the U.S. Attorney's Office and his friends remembered him as a man who not only fought in courtrooms but also lived his beliefs. He had been a staunch advocate for common-sense gun regulations, deeply disturbed by the increasing number of deaths caused by guns in the hands of those who should not have them. His work, particularly in prosecuting illegal gun trafficking, had earned him both admiration and animosity. Some speculated that his murder was the result of his outspoken activism. The gun lobby, with its vast network of supporters, had long targeted figures like Thomas, men and women who sought to impose limits on the free flow of firearms into the streets. It was impossible to ignore the possibility that someone who disagreed with his views had taken matters into their own hands. For his family, the pain was unbearable. Thomas left behind a wife, children, and colleagues who admired him for both his professional brilliance and his personal integrity. His widow, in the years that followed, would continue to advocate for the cause he had championed with such passion, refusing to let his death be in vain. She fought to keep his memory alive, calling for answers to the questions that remained unresolved. His legacy, she believed, deserved more than silence. The investigation into Thomas Wales's murder remains open. No one has ever been charged, and to this day, his death is shrouded in mystery. Yet the man who had devoted his life to justice and to the fight for gun control has not been forgotten. His tragic end, occurring so suddenly and violently, only underscored the very message he had spent his career preaching, that the cost of inaction on gun violence was far too high. In the years since, the memory of Thomas C. Wales has continued to inspire those in law enforcement, legal circles, and advocacy groups. His story serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that come with speaking out against powerful interests and the need to protect those who dare to fight for a safer world.